In this lesson, we'll discuss Carmen Jones, distributed in 1954. Let's talk about the historical context. Again, this film was distributed in 1954. In the 1950s was known as a period of national conformity and apathy. So a lot of people just followed the social mores of that time, did not want to disrupt make any kind of disruption whatsoever. We have to also understand that during this time the Cold War was going on, and this occurred between 1947 through 1991, and it was the U.S. and Western Bloc against the Soviet Union and the rest of the Eastern Bloc. These two large groups battled over how governments were run, either run as a Marxist-Leninist state or a capitalist state with free elections. Also during this time, the McCarthy era was going on, and Senator McCarthy put out communist witch hunts basically to suppress any dissension or political criticism. People who were seen as sympathizers to the communist regime were targeted with little to no evidence, and those who were accused suffered loss of employment and or destruction of their careers, and in some cases, some people were imprisoned. We also have to think about gender during this time. There's a sense of purity versus sexiness. So Grace Kelly versus Marilyn Monroe, the whore and the Madonna dichotomy, and also conformity versus rebellion. So those who were straight and narrow versus those who are more rebellious, as we can see in movies with James Dean. During this time, there's a lot of racial unrest. African Americans are fighting for civil rights as they did previously, but now it's becoming more intense. We see here in 1954, the Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education Supreme Court case was passed, which ended Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that separate but equal existed. In this case, it did not. And so education and other types of public institutions were finally desegregated, at least by law. By intent or purpose, did not really happen without enforcement. Also during this time, Emmett Till, a young 14-year-old boy from Chicago, was killed in Mississippi visiting his aunt for allegedly winking or flirting with a white woman. His body was brutalized and found in a river. His body was later returned to Chicago, where a public funeral with open casket viewing took place. And his mother, Mamie Till, made the decision to show America's racism and barbarism of lynching, and how American democracy is not really for all Americans. During this time also, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. became in prominence, and he became one of the major leaders of the civil rights era. We also have to think about how Hollywood has also changed. During this time, televisions were introduced to most American homes, and so this made the movie industry have to change. Because television was everyone's home, movie theater attendance tapered off, and so Hollywood tried to make accommodations by having widescreen showings, have different or bolder themes. So they moved away from the escapism films that we spoke about earlier to message or problem films, so things dealing with real life. And spectators went to movies not only to see black performers, but also for insights on the black experience. So we see more representation, whether accurate or not, can be debated. We see more black people in film. So back to Carmen Jones, some major themes that we see in that. First of all, it was a modern version of Bizet's opera Carmen. And this is one of the first films with an all-black cast. And we see here specifically about black women in the case of Carmen, that she is portrayed as a sexual savage. And Dorothy Dandridge, in her real life, and also in this film, is considered to be a tragic mulatto. A tragic mulatto is a mixed race person, usually white and black, who is torn because of their mixed ancestry. Their whiteness is applauded where their blackness brings them to their tragic ending. The director of this film is Otto Preminger, and he first rejected Dorothy Dandridge as Carmen Jones. He thought she was too sophisticated, too good. Later, Dorothy came back in, dressed very appropriate for the movie, so very tight, low-cut sweater and a very tight dress, and put on this kind of performance to show that she could essentially play a whore. We're going to focus mostly on Dorothy Dandridge as the major player in the film. She was born in Cleveland in 1922. She again was biracial, black-white. She was a child performer with her sister Vivian, and so she was in the entertainment industry for a very long time. Her mother was also a performer. She was a comedian. Later on in life, Dorothy married Harold Nicholas, who was also a performer, and in a divorce. But before that divorce, they had one child, Harolyn, who was born brain damaged, and this really shook up Dorothy, and she probably never healed from feeling at blame for her daughter's condition. Because of all the hardship she had growing up, and then with her child, she became very driven to become a star. She put a lot of work into being this performer, being famous. Eventually, her hard work was paid off. She was the first African American woman to win an Academy Award nomination as Best Actress. Again, Dorothy Dandridge, although the tragic mulatto is a character, she is known as the token tragic mulatto. Again, this is a result of miscegenation. It was a literary figure and term in books and movies, basically saying miscegenation should be avoided because the child ends up having a very destructive, tragic life. And after Carmen Jones, Dorothy Dandridge really couldn't find good work. A lot of the roles were token roles. She played the same type of role over and over again. So eventually she returned to nightclub work. And then, because she was such a public figure, people paid attention to her private life especially. She was rumored to only having romantic relationships with white men, specifically to better her career. She eventually married Jack Dennison, and this is a very abusive relationship. She was known to be very frugal and thrifty, but he persuaded her in various accounts to invest in things like his restaurants, which led them into bankruptcy. And then after 3 years of marriage, they eventually divorced. Dorothy Dandridge suffered also from mental illness, and it's suspected that she died from an overdose of an antidepressant given by her doctor. So in terms of the character Carmen Jones, she is a sexy young woman working in a parachute factory, and this is during a wartime. She tempts a good old boy, army soldier, played by Harry Belafonte, from his innocent girlfriend. So again, kind of reflecting post-World War II time. Eventually, Carmen Jones dumps the good old boy for another man, and eventually this man who was dumped goes a little crazy and kills her as he sings a song. So implications, what does this movie mean? Well, in terms of Dorothy Dandridge, these films were seen as a way to integrate Hollywood. So finally having people of color in movies. Again, Carmen Jones was an adaptation of the opera Carmen from Bizet. We also see like this growth of this idea of you want to be famous, so, and of stardom and of attention. So now we have all these magazines and television shows talking about what celebrities' lives are like, and if there was a time that we can pinpoint as the starting point, it would be the 1950s. We also see that spectators or patrons of movies and television have this longing to fulfill the question for desires, like why are they going to see these movies or television shows? What are they trying to fulfill? Well, again, during this time, there was this conformist idea or purity idea, and to see this person of color, a woman, being very sexual was a way to escape and maybe live that out for themselves without any of the consequences. And we also see in film racialized images manifest into real racist attitudes and behaviors. So we see here with Dorothy Dandridge as Carmen Jones, like, oh, that's how black women are. They're just sexual. They'll do what they need to get what they want without any thought of the other person. We see the commodification, dehumanization of black women's bodies. Again, being sexual is not wrong, but again, if it's used as a way to escape for a white person's gaze, it could be wrong, or a way for a masculine gaze to unravel the woman's clothing and see what she would really be like. That's when it becomes wrong. We got to think about the gaze. So now some quotes from Bell Hooks in her book Real to Real. This is true of both movie culture and the realm of phone sex. So she was writing about a film from Spike Lee called Girl 6, and it was about the phone sex industry. So this is true of both movie culture and the realm of phone sex. The head of the agency reminds the women that they must describe themselves as white, unless they're assuming a role that is requested fantasy. So again, back to purity versus sexuality. Whiteness is pure. Anything that is not white is not pure. And in terms of the next quote, it's about Tina Turner and Ike Turner. Ike's pornographic fantasy of the black female as wild sexual savage emerged from the impact of a white patriarchal controlled media, shaping his perceptions of reality. His decision to create the wild black woman was perfectly compatible with prevailing representation of black female sexuality in a white supremacist society. What Bell Hooks is implying here is that Ike Turner learned how to sexualize Tina Turner. He learned how to package her according to white patriarchal standards. That he controlled her sexuality and what that looked like. Some questions to think about in terms of this movie or any other movie. Can a racial or ethnic group's experience be expressed or represented in film accurately? Why or why not? Can a black actor be successful in Hollywood without compromising self or community? How so? Is the animalistic, savage sexual stereotypes changing for black men or black women in Hollywood? How or why not? So again, what do these representations mean for the black community? And are black actors and actresses compromising to make it in Hollywood?